Welcome to the TomorrowZone Catalyst Podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Reuben. Many workplaces are running on depleted energy. Burnout, disengagement, cultural misalignment are eroding performance and retention all over the place. And people are just craving purpose and connection and conditions where they can do their best work. It's a challenge for sure, but it's also an opportunity. How might leaders redesign the work experience so that both people and performance flourish, especially when it seems like the only constant is change? And that's what we're exploring with today's guest. I'm excited to be joined today by Dr. André Martin. He is an organizational psychologist and author of the book, Wrong Fit, Right Fit: Why How We Work Matters More Than Ever. He's the former head of talent and culture at Mars, Target, Google, and Nike, and currently serves as an operating partner, executive team coach, and sports psychologist to elite athletes. Very cool. His work on inspiration and the evolving role of the manager and career fulfillment has challenged leaders to reimagine how they design work, where both people and performance can thrive. So I'm really excited to get into this conversation with you, André. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Deborah. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to dive in a little bit about your background. How does your sports psychology background influence how you're thinking about the way teams can thrive in the workplace these days?
Yeah, Deborah, it's interesting. So it's sort of all come full circle for me. So when I was in graduate school, my area of research was in this space called collective efficacy, which I'll geek out for like 5 seconds, but it's basically the idea of self-confidence at a group or team level. And so I was kind of looking at this idea of whether or not, one, does confidence in a group increase its ability to perform? And if so, what kind of things can you do to increase that sense of confidence? And I think what was really interesting is I did all my early research with sports teams. And so it kind of led me into the sports psychology space. And I was really intrigued by this idea of, leadership on a athletic team, really different than corporate America. Because most leadership in a sports team sort of happens by chance. I need this person to do this specific thing so I can excel at this part of the game. And so just finding this way to say, hey, leadership is shared. It can be emergent. And if we can sort of build the collective confidence that we all have as a team and our capability to succeed, then we just radically increase our chances. So sports psychology plays in 2 ways. One, was where I started, which is really fun. And secondly, I find that, athletes are a really good sort of archetype for us to think about as we think about the next evolution of the corporate athlete, which I know Tony Schwartz talked about way back when, but it's like this idea of like, how do we actually get executives to peak performance more times than not? And that's, I think, what athletes have really learned how to do well.
Well, and I think that the notion of collective performance.
Yeah, collective confidence.
Yeah, that's interesting as well. A lot of folks are dealing with disengagement. There's worry. There's a lot of pressure today. And, you talk about thriving at work. What does that look like to you? And why are so many workplaces seeming to be falling short right now?
That's a really good question. First, let's start with sort of the furthest out possibility in the space. I think there's going to be a company that in the next 5 years will have the employee value proposition of come to work here and you will walk out healthier.
Ooh.
Physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, and maybe even spiritually in the end. And the reason I say this, because I think we have all the ingredients, right? We have all this amazing technology like Oura rings and Apple Watches to tell us how we're feeling like minute by minute. We have, coming out of COVID, this sense of what it really feels like to not thrive. When, we have all this data that tells us there's $9.6 trillion of lost productivity in the workplace due to disengagement right now.
Wow.
And we have all this pressure on us around performance. And so I really think that in the end, this myth of balance is going to disappear, right? It's going to be about harmony, right? Am I in harmony with the choices I make? Do the choices that I make sort of lead me to a place where I'm getting a chance to do my best work. And I think in that scenario, thriving is going to mean that I will inherently be fully at harmony, that my work and my life will be adding up to something that just makes sense to me. And that's kind of what we're shooting for. I've never been the psychologist that says there's a single way to run your life. Some people love work, right? They'll work 90 hours a week. And I'm like, if that's what you love, go do it. And other people demand other things. Like work is much more of a means to an end. Mm-hmm. And you know what? That has to be okay too. And so I think this idea of like, some company's going to figure this out, and when they do, it's going to raise the bar for all of us in terms of the way we think about our systems, our structures, our method of leadership, the way we reward and recognize people. I think the second part of that question is, why is it so hard now? There's sort of a few reasons why. I think the first one is that we never really went through all the stress cycles around COVID. We never went fully through all that, right? We got back to a place where we were just able to survive. And I think that's kind of where we've stayed. So, we need to go back probably and just, do a little bit of corporate sort of counseling to get us all to go back and go like, COVID was really hard on us.
Yeah.
It severed and damaged relationships. It put us on our back heels. It made us question why we're a part of places. And I think we haven't fully resolved that. So that's one thing that I think we have to sort of get through. Secondly, is we focus on the wrong things. Often in companies, we've been really sort of focused on this idea of perks, ping pong tables and benefits packages and micro kitchens and snacks and all this stuff. And it's like, we just get on this hedonic sort of treadmill where we're just trying to give the next thing to keep people's sort of dopamine rush happening, when in fact, there's a better way to construct your relationship with your employees. I come from a place, and I don't think I'm alone, that I'm fascinated by companies. I'm fascinated by the fact that they are quirky and they're complicated. But we all try to hide that in our companies, right? We need to actually let our quirkiness shine so people can be fascinated by the places they work and walk in every day going, I wonder what's going to happen next, as opposed to I dread going there.
So I got to double click on that.
Yeah, you got it.
What would it look like for a company to let their quirkiness shine? And do you know, you've worked with a lot of different companies and teams. Do you know of any examples where that's happening or beginning to happen?
Well, I think what's really interesting, Deborah, is I think the early stage companies are probably the closest iteration, right? Because, when we start a company out of, the proverbial garage, we're basically hanging out with 5 people we really like, trying to figure out how to do a thing. And so we have all these natural ways of working, right? How we solve problems, how we kick off meetings, how we give feedback, develop people, manage conflict, socialize ideas. All those things are sort of natural, and they're done really ineffectively often, and they're done really uniquely, right? But as we grow, we hire all these people in from all these world-class companies, from all these different places, and they bring with them not just their technical skills, but all those quote unquote best practices for how you run a company. And I think what happens to us is we lose our ability to kind of say, hey, what is our brand of crazy? Right? How do we actually like to get work done? You are a founder of a company, and you have a very unique way you like to get work done. But when we start hiring people who are from bigger companies and better places, we start questioning whether or not that best practice is better for us, when in fact, you want to create a place that just feels natural. And I think that's probably how we let our quirkiness shine first, is we go back to like, what are our unique ways of working? And how do we codify that, teach that, and actually just shout that from the rafters?
I love that so much. Have you found any solutions or ways to like measure that or identify that?
I think you can look at a couple of, interesting examples. Like there's this company called the Framery in Finland that, does some really interesting things around how they construct work, how they think about autonomy and transparency, how they allow people to have agency and to make decisions. And I think what I'd say is, I sort of study companies all the time. I've been in some of the biggest brands in the world, and at their best, they're all totally different, right? Think about it this way. I'll give you a really easy example. So you go to socialize an idea, right? You're basically selling an idea to people. If you go to Google, right, as an example, or any tech company, you got to come with like a 26-page research paper, right? Because data wins the day, depth wins the day, deep thinking wins the day. You go to a place like Nike and it's a marketing company, right? So you got to bring a brand ready, beautiful presentation with poetry that's going to knock people's socks off. You go to Amazon, it's a 2-page memo. And so, what's really interesting to me is I think we would have more talent thriving if we were more obvious about our ways of working, because the person that excels at Google in the 26-page research paper world probably isn't the person that's going to love working at Nike. Right. But we get seduced by brands. When we hire employees in, it's like a big dating app where we're like our most professional, totally buttoned up. There's no craziness here. We're the best place in the world to work. And then I think we hire in external leaders and they bring all their stuff with them, all their favorite toys. And that sort of dilutes our special sauce.
That is so interesting. And I already have a whole page of notes. But I love that question. What is our brand of crazy? You've done a lot of work in this space. You've written about, reframing the role of managers. So how do you see the role of managers and leaders evolving to better support performance and high energy so teams can thrive?
It's a great question. I think there's a couple of things I'd say right away. One is just even language matters at the start. Instead of calling them managers, calling them team leaders, right? Because, I always think about it this way: is your job as a manager is to, no longer create lightning strikes. It's to create the conditions for lightning to happen amongst your team. So your job isn't to tell people how to do the thing that you were really good at. Your job isn't to stand over their shoulder and tell them when they're doing something wrong or right. Your job is to create conditions where they can come in and do the best work of their lives, right? But that's not the way most managers walk into their job, because if you think about how we hire managers, we hire them because they were great individual contributors. It's our carrot that we can give them. Wow, you've done such a good job in this role. I'm going to make you a manager. And what we're inherently telling them, whether we know it or not, is I liked what you do so much that I want you to go teach it to everybody else. And that's actually not what you want them to do. Mm-hmm. Because that, no one's like them and no one will do the job. And so they have to sort of, and again, I'll use these words from Vidula Ball, a friend of mine who I worked with for a long time at Mars and Center for Creative Leadership. She used to say the job of a manager is to be a star maker. You should be the person who literally talent flows in and out of your purview very quickly, right? That you're the place where people go to learn how this company does work, make sense of the culture, sort of gain skill, and then they go off and do fantastic things. And that's, when you think about a metric for that, that's the metric. Is I'll tell you your best team leader by telling you who flows through the team the most and goes the highest. And often those people aren't regaled in our companies. The person that stays at the director level and that people love working for, and everyone that goes through their team goes on to do amazing things, but they stay right there when they should probably be the highest paid person in the company.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, the leader who can grow other leaders, invaluable. Such a great concept.
Deborah, the other side, just real quick, that I always get the question of, well, what happens if I work for a bad manager?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what's interesting about that is I don't accept the premise.
Oh,
because here's the deal: is I think every manager is malleable. And I believe we all have the opportunity to make our managers. And here's why: as you go up in a company, the one truism is that you get less and less feedback the higher that you go, right? Because the higher you go, the more things people want from you and the less likely they are to give you real feedback. Secondly, is everybody feels a little bit like an imposter as you excel, as you move up the managerial sort of train. You start to feel less and less sort of confident that you can do this next bigger thing, lead this bigger team, this bigger department. And so if you take those two things together, right? What I always tell people is I'm like, you want to make your manager, here's what you do. Make a list of the top 10 qualities you need from your leader to be effective. Write them down, get super clear about what they look like. And then every time your current manager does just one of those things, the next chance you get, tell them. Say, hey, boss, I really love that you opened up this meeting and gave this inspiration dose. It made me feel really good. It connected me to you and the team. I just want to say thank you. And you know what happens the next time they open a meeting? They're going to do the thing, right? Because they inherently, they want to be great. And we often shy away from giving feedback. I'm like, a compliment costs you nothing.
Yeah.
It's so easy to give. And if you know what you're looking for, you can sort of create a manager that's going to provide you more of those things, more days.
Well, and now that what you were talking about before, where you've got someone that is a star maker, you're actually, through this reframe, you're helping your star maker become more of a star. It's kind of it sounds like it's kind of a self-reinforcing loop, or I don't know the terminology, but
yeah, 100%, 100%. And it's, it's another one of those things that's like, it's fixable. And, I feel as bad for managers right now as I do with employees. I think it's a really hard time to be a leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm seeing, like, back to the front end, like that idea of like collective confidence. That's most of my work right now with executive teams, is actually building that up. Because in this age where everything's getting disrupted, you're fighting for every dollar. When you open your mouth, you're probably going to offend somebody. I just find that most leaders are kind of sitting on their heels right now. They're a little scared to screw it up. And so they're playing it pretty safe, even though in their gut, they know exactly what they need to do. And it's just a little bit tough for them to muster the courage or the confidence to do the hard thing. And, I think that's what the world needs right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially now. I mean, the stakes are high. The pressure's even higher. So, I mean, this is a challenge for leaders, but what are some practical ways that individual contributors could also shape their conditions for thriving, even if they're not in that leadership role? I mean, you gave one, like encouraging your leader, phenomenal advice, but what else can they do?
Well, there's a few things coming through the book. The book was really an interview-based book where I talked to basically 100 and some, leaders from highest level CEOs and big companies to new joiners to firms. And one of the things that became really clear is that there are buffers you can put in place, which are like when you're having a wrong fit experience, when, your place doesn't feel like the place you want to be. And there were like 3 or 4 that I really loved. Some were about sort of purpose and mission. Others were about sort of relationships. On the purpose or mission side, one thing that you can do is just make sure you're connecting to your consumer every single day in some way. Whether if you're in Target, go to a Target store every day. Find a story of a Target consumer who liked what the team did. Find a review of the company of someone saying something good, because like we're so oriented to hate and, critique that it's really important just to find the good. So it's there, in every company, like it's there. You just got to look hard for it someday. So that's one thing. I think secondly is make sure you're aware of where your creative energy is flowing, right? Because often what I find is that, people don't understand that their creative energy is flowing all the time. Sometimes it's flowing to coping mechanisms. It's flowing to being a victim. It's flowing to finding what's negative and wrong in the world. It's flowing to ruminating, right? Just playing these narratives of things that have passed in our head again and again and again, because we're essentially trying to figure them out. But you got to watch that. And so find a creative outlet is the second thing I'd say. If it's in work, fantastic. If it's adjacent to work, even better. If it's way, way, way outside of work, I don't care. That's great. But go and do that. Because at least then you're assuring your creative energy is flowing towards something that's productive. And that can be a big energizer. Last but not least, and this was one of my favorites that came up through the interview, is find your workplace doppelganger.
Oh.
Now, like, what is that? So imagine, Deborah, that you're in this big company. And it's not someone that looks like you, which is typically what a doppelganger is. It's actually someone who is at the same level as you, has a similar job to you, a similar skill set and experience, except they're different on one factor. That person is thriving in this workplace, and you spend every day slogging through mud. Because what that tells you, and this is often what I see with talent, is when things are going bad, they blame the company. They go super global. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, you can have dysfunctional teams. You can have really bad leaders. You can have competitive and political peers. Most companies don't don't go out to create a really bad culture at large. It's antithetical to business, right? It makes no sense. So the reality is probably that whatever team environment you're on, it's probably not a good place. But if you can find your doppelganger, there's probably good cause to stay at the company and find a different place to go. Because if they can thrive, what that tells me is I could too. Mm-hmm. I just can't thrive in the environment I am right now.
Yeah. You know what? I really love that, Andre, because it not only challenges an individual to take ownership of that, but it also gives hope. Because I talk to people all over our industry and outside the industry, and a lot of them, they love the work that they do, and they want to feel like they're making an impact, and that the work that they do has meaning. But they start to get disenchanted.
That's right.
When that's disconnected. But it's so exciting to hear that there are things that you can do to change that situation for yourself, that it's not dependent on, if your leader's, I'm going to say in air quotes, bad, because we talked about that, but that you have some control.
I mean, you really do. So a buddy of mine, Mark Fitzloff, he used to be the head of Wyden Kennedy in Portland. He runs his own advertising firm called Opinionated. We actually have been working on a book and wrote a article on this idea called the fascination factor, which is we actually think if we can get beyond engagement, which hasn't moved in like a decade, and start actually getting people to the place where they allow themselves to be fascinated by companies again, right? You look at Amazon. I mean, Amazon is so fascinating. Now, a lot of people don't love working there always. It's really competitive. It's cutthroat. It's all those things. But if you can stand back and go, actually, I mean, it is just such a cool experiment in creating a company. One of the things I loved in doing the research for the book was if you go to relentless.com right now and typed it in, you'll actually get sent to the Amazon website. And that's because Jeff Bezos, when he was choosing the names for the company, he had this sense of this value of relentlessness, wanting to, prove you can have an online bookstore and do the thing. And so there's just all this lore, all this sort of super cool ideas. And the fact is that about 60% of the people in any of these companies are fairly happy. 40% aren't. And maybe it comes down to like that 40% might not fit, which is what my book was about, or they've lost the ability to be fascinated by it. Mm-hmm. They become jaded. And so we sort of have this way for people to be fascinated and way for companies to rebuild their fascination factor to their people. So that was sort of the idea of the book. But it's that whole concept of, man, human systems, they blow me away.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're just, and I've been in them and they're hard, but I've never been in a company where I wasn't anything but ultimately fascinated by everything that was going on around me. And I think if we could get people back in that mind space, they would enjoy even places that might not really fit them that well, but that they're in, they can look at it and go, man, this is actually super interesting. There's a lot to learn.
Yeah. Here. Well, that's super intriguing. So, Andre, when you were doing research on this, did you find any connection to the situation that we came out of with COVID? Because you said, we haven't really dealt with that yet. Have we lost fascination along the way because of what's been happening in the world?
Deborah, I think we have. I would start here, which is there's this great book called Burnout by the Goski sisters, and it was written originally for women coming out of COVID during the time. And one of the things I love that they said is burnout isn't about overwhelm, right? It's not about having too many things in your calendar. It's actually about this idea that we are failing to go through stress cycles, and so we keep the weight of all these things that are happening on us until they topple over like a game of Jenga. Right. And that's actually what happens. And so I think when you look at COVID, one of the things about COVID is we lost our connection to each other.
Yeah.
We lost our connection to our companies. We lost our connection to our peers. We lost our connection to our neighbors. Right. We started to orient a world of our own design. Right. Our worlds became impossibly small, but they were fully in our design. We controlled all the elements. So we opened the world back up. And it's chaotic and it's confusing and everyone's on this productivity. We need to be able to make money and cover cost and efficiency, and all those things start to be really important. What we lost was this idea of being connected. And I think we need to regain that. And to me, in order to get connected again, we have to be fascinated by each other.
Yeah.
We even look at the political landscape. like I bet how many times you meet an individual that if you never knew their political stance and you talk to them at a cocktail party, you'd be like, oh my God, that person's super fascinating. Hear their political stance, whatever side of the lane you live on, and they are colored almost immediately, right? You're fearful, you're untrusting, you're all these things. You're worried that it's going to come up and you won't be able to be friends. And I think that's happening way too much where like even at a human level, we're not as fascinated by each other.
We talk a lot about curiosity in our work. And similar to you, what we found is when people can pause long enough to step back away from the fires of day to day and really take a look at, and what we're looking at is people, process, technology, forces of change. But we're looking at the full big picture of the systems in a company and getting people curious about that. It changes things. And after, we found that after a regular cadence of doing this, they start to shift to possibility mode. And now there's this, I wonder. It's kind of that fascination thing, but we've seen that it kind of takes time to get into the mindset. And it's surprisingly one of the big discoveries for people is questions are good. It's almost like that, you have to be open to stepping back and asking new questions to get fascinated.
You do. And, it goes back to like, I don't know if you saw this article, it got reprinted again recently in the New York Times, 36 questions to fall in love with somebody.
Ooh.
And it's Arthur Arns. It's all this information out there, all this research he did around how to help people accelerate falling in love. And although the questions may not be appropriate for every relationship, the idea of like, if we could hold 36 questions about each other at an increasing level of depth, I don't care what you're talking about. If you can hold that space for that long, invariably, you're going to walk out more connected, more fascinated, more interested. And I think you're right. It's both about, wow, questions are good. And it's actually about, and staying in the question and being willing to hear the answer even better.
Well, I was looking back at my notes too, and this relates back to what you were saying earlier. If you want to find that fascination again, dive in and observe your customers, reconnect to your consumer, reconnect to your why of your role and find that purpose again. And I just think that, it's so exciting and hopeful to know that there are things that you can do, because a lot of folks are feeling like they're not thriving in their work these days. So,
and they're not, Deborah. All the data would tell us that they're not. And so whoever's listening, like, I want you to hear this from me, is like, I see all the pain. Like I see people who 70% of the United States has the Sunday scaries. Like they hit Sunday night, they don't want to go to work. 40% of people feel lonely or isolated at work every day. Many people are disengaged. Many more are suffering from, real mental strain and emotional strain from their job. And here's the reason I both have sympathy and I'm really trying to stay optimistic is we'll spend 13.5 of our adult years of our adult life at work. That's every second, every day, every month for 13.5 years. It's second only to sleep in terms of how much time we'll spend doing any one thing. It's far outweighs the amount of time we're going to have with family and friends. And so I'm just in this place where I'm like, we all have to work to make it better, and I go, hey, if all we all did was go back to the day before you started at the job you're currently working at and go back that moment and ask yourself what your conversation was with your spouse, your best friend, or whoever you were talking to about starting work the next day. I will guarantee you were in love. You were in love. And I will also guarantee you that some of those things actually still exist. You've just lost sight of them because they've been buried under all this other stuff that's been happening. And so just go back to the day before you joined and try to remind yourself about why you said yes in the first place. And then spend a week just trying to see those things. It's the same thing with married relationships, right? We still love our partners. We've just lost them along the way. And if we can go back and remember, like, what did we fall in love with? And actually just try to see that stuff for a while and only that stuff. I think more times than not, you're going to find that it's there. And we just have to allow ourselves to see it again.
That is really powerful. I was just talking to someone this morning about something similar, but when you tell your brain to look for something, it's going to find it.
100%. I mean, it's the most amazing part of being human.
Yeah.
Right. It's not, it's all these TikTok kids are like, we're manifesting our futures. I'm like, no, you're just putting intention in the world. Like the information was always there. You just didn't see it because you were focused on something else, how the human mind works. And I'm like, I think we just start focusing on things that are making us feel bad. When maybe, we start focusing a little more time on the things that are there that do make us feel good. And, we just balance the scales a little bit to start.
I love that. Yeah, looking for the good in the world. Speaking of good in the world, you mentioned that you're working on another book. And can I ask about that? How's it going? And
it's going well. Yeah, so I've got 2 in the works. So one is I just got my developmental letter off the first draft back. That one is actually around collective confidence. So it's a book written to say, hey, in this era of anxiety and frustration and disengagement, what can leaders and people do to increase the collective confidence of a team, a group, a community? And some really good research and practices that are so simple and so beautiful. And I just had a blast. I did a bunch of interviews for that book, more at the team and organizational level. I mean, from, a team that started a really big, fast growing beverage company to someone who runs the biggest camp at Burning Man. And just the variety of those stories and the ability to find practices around that. It's been great. I'm super excited about that book because I think it, as much as I love the first one and I am so glad I wrote it, this one is much more core to my work that I do every day. Uh-huh. And I just think we need this topic to be out in front of us. This idea of confidence can help. It can help us do the hard things, which we're all going to be saddled with doing here for a bit. And then the other book is the Fascination book that I'm working on with my good friend Mark Fitzloff. So that's a little earlier stage. We just had an article published with Duke CE, and that one's fun. That's just I get to play around in brands and companies and look for all the good in them, and that's been a blast.
I'm fascinated by this topic.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to both of those. It sounds like really exciting work. And I'm just curious, we talked about a bunch of different things in this episode today, but if a listener were to take just one step today toward making their work a place where they can thrive, where would you suggest that they start?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably start with this idea of just reminding yourself of what you loved the day before you started working there and see if you can find a little bit of that again. I think that's a good place to start in a lot of different ways, not just at work, but particularly that one stands with me because I've been in places where I've fallen out of love, companies and people, and I don't think they changed. I think my perspective did.
That's awesome. Well, André, I want to just thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. I could have went on for hours with you, and I can't wait to see your books when they come out. So you'll have to let me know when they're ready. To our listeners, I hope that you found some wisdom nuggets in this conversation. I know I did. I took 3 pages of notes during the show. Thanks again, André, for joining us. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, I encourage you to stay curious and choose to make awesome happen.